Hello, my dear Franken friends, and welcome to Spookyou, your one-stop shop for all things ghastly and ghoulish. I'm your host, Barnabas Vixen. How horrible of you to join us. Curl up, invite your friends, and by all means, make sure those lights are out. That way it's harder to tell what may or may not be lurking around you. There's nothing like a good mystery, am I right? Tonight will feature a singular tale of devilish design, curated by those wicked weavers of woe. And without further ado, allow me to pass the reins on over to our vivacious voiceover virtuoso, Trey Falco, for tonight's sinister story. Please keep all limbs and side covers at all times. We wouldn't want anything to go missing now, would we? I didn't think it was very funny. Not one bit. No one would take me seriously. They said I was just trying to get attention or that I was fundamentally unhinged. But, I guess I don't really blame them. I'd be incredulous too if someone told me that every night a different employee from Orange Julius tucked them into bed. Still, I know what I experienced. My nightly visitations always followed the same pattern. First, they announced their arrival. I'd be laying in bed when the lights would flicker in 3 even flashes. The acrid odor of orange peels would waft into my bedroom. Even if I hid my face under the sheets, I could still sense the sickly aroma. And soon, the doorknob would rattle and the bedroom door would whine sickly as it yawned open. Then, without fail, a uniformed Orange Julius employee would emerge from the doorway. The first thing I always noticed about them was their grotesque grin. There was nothing supernatural about it. It wasn't impossibly wide, nor were their teeth anything but human. Instead, what shocked me was its familiarity. Every one of my visitors donned plastic, customer service smiles, complete with taut cheeks and emotionless eyes. My visitors were never the same person. One night, I was tucked into bed by a lanky man with the long fingers of a pianist. Then, the next evening, it was a portly woman with a jeweled-studded nose piercing. They all wore the same distinct uniforms that had the words Orange Julius emblazoned across their chest. Of course, my natural instinct was to leap out of bed, grab a baseball bat, and shout, "Get out of my room, you bastard!" I would have loved nothing more than to turn upside down one of those obscene smiles. But that was impossible. As soon as my bedroom door was opened, I was completely paralyzed. I was frozen like I was encased in ice. And it's not fear that bound me. No, it was something else. Some invisible force that renders me unable to lift a finger. The only part of my body I retained control of were my eyes, and they darted around helplessly in their sockets as I took in the nightly spectacle. I watched as my visitor emerged from the doorway and haltingly approached my bed. They moved in jerking, hesitant motions, almost like they were new to their bodies and were still getting used to the mechanics. As they drew closer, the smell of oranges became unbearable. I would have thrown up if I still possessed that faculty. And then the part I dreaded the most. My visitor would stop beside my bed. They would tilt their face so that it was only inches in front of mine. And then they would stare deeply into my eyes. Face to face, we remained stationary for what seemed like a drawn-out eternity. Hours would pass. I don't know what they were doing or why they were doing it. It was extremely uncomfortable and awkward. And then, after sufficient time had elapsed, they looked away from me and they completed their ritual. They leaned over, kissed me on the forehead, pulled my blankets up to my chest, and retreated back out the door. As soon as the door snapped shut, I regained complete control of my body. If I rushed to the door and swung it open, they would be long gone. In fact, there's never any evidence that anyone had ever visited. After my first visit, I phoned the police. And I remember the bemused look on the officer's face. He couldn't hold back a smirk when he said he'd do everything within his power to help me with this situation. But first I have to sober up and have a good night's rest. Then, after my second visit, I phoned the police again. This time, they were less entertained. They said I was wasting their time, and they recommended a psychiatric evaluation. I told all my friends and family. At first, they laughed at me, thought it was an amusing yarn I spun from my overactive imagination. They said it was a recurring nightmare and to just walk it off. When I failed to relent and persisted on retelling the story, the laughter died off and concern flooded in. Everyone told me I was stressed, confused, and mistaken. They said I should see a counselor, a psychiatrist, or a neurologist. I made and kept appointments with all three, but honestly, they failed to help. I was desperate. I asked a priest and a psychic, and they were no help at all. So I went down to the local Orange Julius and gave them a piece of my mind. The staff all looked confused when I asked them why they were tucking me into bed every night. I raised my voice and slammed the counter with my fist when they denied any wrongdoing. And I was escorted out of the food court by mall security. I felt really bad about my public outburst. When I calmed down, I concluded they had nothing to do with what was going on. They all wore different uniforms that said Dairy Queen and Orange Julius. Moreover, I failed to recognize any of the alarmed employees as having visited me at night. Still, night after night, my visitors came. I felt like I was running endlessly in a hamster wheel, and nothing I did seemed to help. I propped up a webcam on my bedside table and set it to record before going to bed, but when I checked it in the morning, I found that it had failed to record anything but static. Undeterred, I installed a new deadbolt and the barrel bolt on my bedroom door. I was certain this barrier would keep them out. I double-checked to ensure every lock was secure before going to sleep. My visitors would need a locksmith or a crowbar if they hoped to enter. Nevertheless, even this proved futile. The locks clicked open and my bedroom door swept open, unimpeded. I was growing more and more frustrated, so I bought a half dozen bear traps online. I carefully armed them by spreading back their jagged, razor-sharp teeth and placed them around my bedroom floor. That night, I waited anxiously for my visitor to arrive. Unfortunately, they were not impeded in the slightest, and by the time they came and went, none of the bear traps had been activated. By this point, after months of nightly visitation by over 100 different uniformed Orange Julius employees, my sanity was attenuated to an all-time low. I was dangling on the edge of a psychotic break and about to tip into the abyss. Until she appeared. She was not just another intruder. The lights flickered 3 times before she entered. And even though she wore the same Orange Julius uniform as all the other nocturnal visitors, I knew right away that she was different. When she smiled, she didn't don a plastic grimace. No, she actually looked happy. I could trace signs of amusement in her sky blue eyes, an expression I never saw on the faces of any previous visitor. She closed my bedroom door behind her and she approached me with confidence. She seemed comfortable in her body, and unlike the others, she didn't wear it like an ill-fitting suit. She sat down beside me on my bed and leaned towards my face. I always dreaded this part. This prolonged staring contest. But with her, I felt that it was going to be different. As I laid frozen in bed, she locked my gaze, and at once, I came to the realization that she was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. I wanted to stare into her eyes for hours. But that's not what happened. No, instead, she gently brushed my cheek with the back of her hand, gave me a kiss on my forehead, and then tucked me in. And then she left, And even though her departure meant I could move again, I was stunned. Death check! Oh, Barnabas here. Just checking to see if you're still alive. All my previous visitors followed a strict ritual, and for months I could trust its disturbing repetition. No one ever strayed from the formula, but she did. Even more shockingly, the next night she returned. Another first. I've never had a repeat visitor. Then she came the next night, and the next. And even though she never said a single word, I was happy it was her. I felt tenderness radiate from her. When she kissed me on the forehead and tucked me in, I felt joy. Instead of living in a state of constant apprehension, I was actually starting to look forward to her nightly visits. I was falling in love. She visited me every night for a month. On balance, I'd have to say it was one of the best months of my life. But then everything changed. One night she arrived at my doorway while I waited expectantly in bed. This time, she held in her hands what looked like a spool of wound-up wire. Every visitor up until this point had arrived empty-handed. This was a startling new development. She came closer and, as usual, sat down beside me. She leaned in close and whispered into my ear, "Find me." She placed the mysterious object on my bedside table and retreated back out the door. I was shocked. Not only did she forget to kiss me on the forehead and tuck me in, she actually spoke and left something behind. As soon as the door clicked shut, I bolted upright and lunged for whatever it was she left behind. I turned on my bedside lamp and held up the object. It was a slinky. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as I tried to rationalize the past few minutes. First, she actually spoke, and it was a request to find her. I wanted to find her, but how? The only clue I had was this child's plaything. I expected it and found it to be completely innocuous. It was a standard, run-of-the-mill slinky. Possibilities ran through my mind, but solutions proved elusive. Despite being paralyzed when she visited, I needed a way to communicate with her. So I decided upon a handwritten note. I would place it on my chest, on a big piece of paper so it would be unmissable when she sat beside me. On that note, I'd request her help. How would I find her? Who was she? What was the slinky for? I went to bed early that night, anxious for answers. But she never showed up. In fact, no one came. It was the first night in many months that not a single person came into my room to kiss me on the forehead and tuck me in. Until she arrived, I would have greeted the abrupt end of this nightmare with euphoria, but now her presence has changed everything. Now I was disappointed, saddened that I would not be able to stare longingly into her blue eyes or to feel her tender lips press up against my temple. And the next night was the same, and the next night. The visits were over. I was free of their nocturnal torments, and I felt miserable. I knew the answer was in the slinky, but how? I examined every inch of the toy and came up with nothing. After a week had passed, it struck me that I ought to try the slinky on some stairs. I did not expect this futile act to accomplish anything, but I was getting desperate. So I found some stairs, placed the slinky on the top ledge, grabbed a handful of metallic spirals, and set the toy in motion. It lurched its way down the stairs, and once it hit the bottom step, I expected it to stop. But it just kept going, arching its way onto the sidewalk and down the road. It was impossible. It no longer had the energy to propel itself forward, and yet, here it was, making its way down the street. I decided to follow the slinky and see where it went. It wasn't difficult to keep up with. It proceeded at a creeping pace as it sprung itself towards some unknown destination. I walked beside it for over an hour. Eventually, the slinky led me to a row of dilapidated storefronts. They all reeked of neglect and were clearly abandoned for years. Just ahead of me, in one particularly downtrodden building, I spied a figure standing in the doorway. It was her, the woman with the blue eyes. She waved at me and gestured forwards, just before disappearing into the building. "Wait!" I shouted, and I ran towards her. The facade of the structure had seen better days. The front was lined with streaks of peeling paint, and even from the outside it smelled of decay. A sun-bleached sign hung limply over the front door. I could barely make out deteriorated lettering, so I stood back to get a better view and gasped when I realized what I was standing in front of. It was an old Orange Julius. I wanted to follow her, but honestly I was afraid. The compulsion to find her fought with my desire to not enter dark abandoned buildings. It felt like I was being lured by sinister forces to meet my early demise. I decided to brave the unknown if it meant I could see her again. I approached the door. It was boarded up and covered in graffiti. I cautiously pulled on the door handle and was immediately sent flailing backwards as it blasted open. An immense gust of wind pushed me away. I fought to look inside the building, but fine bits of debris pelted me in the face. It was like a giant fan was situated near the entrance and set to maximum power. I forced the door shut and caught my breath outside. There was something unnerving and unnatural about this building. I couldn't explain how such a violent wind could escape from an abandoned structure such as this. I should have turned back. She isn't worth it, I told myself. The nocturnal visits were over. I should be celebrating my newfound freedom. No, I have to find her. There were too many unanswered questions. I had to know where she went and why she brought me here. I had to know who she was and if I meant anything to her. I opened the door and once more I was blasted in the face with a barrage of particulate. I covered my eyes and forced my way inside. The deeper I went, the darker it became. Eventually, I felt like I had progressed far enough that I ought to be well on the other side of the building. And instead, I kept going, unimpeded by no obstacles beyond the darkness and the localized hurricane. Soon, I was so far into this impossibly sized room that I was worried about becoming lost. I wanted to turn back, but when I turned around, there was no longer any clear indication of where back was. Then, all at once, the wind stopped, and just as abruptly, I was blinded by overhead lights. They blinked in a succession of 3 flashes before dousing the room with light. As my eyes adjusted, I came to the terrifying realization that I was surrounded on all sides by people. Dozens of people. In fact, every single one of them wearing the same familiar Orange Julius uniforms that defined my nocturnal torments. They were all around me, smiling that same intense grin, and not one of them moved an inch. All the faces evoked memories that I did not wish to revisit. Every single one of these people had kissed me on the forehead and tucked me in. I felt a chill creep down my spine when I recognized the man with the long fingers standing next to the woman with the nose piercing. There were many more besides. "What the hell is going on here?" I demanded. Everyone remained immobile. I tried to push them aside, but they were pressed so tightly together that they formed an impassable gauntlet. I was trapped. "What do you want?" I shouted. Then, the crowd parted, and a lone individual emerged. It was her, the woman with the blue eyes.
Welcome back, my darling deviants. Well, tell me, did you enjoy that twisted tale? Of course you did. I knew you had that air about you, that hunger for the horrific and the macabre. So, did we spook you? If not, then file a complaint with our complaint department detailing all accounts of non-spookiness you found in this video, and we'll get back to you in 2 to 3 millennia. Give or take a business eon or 2. However, if you've enjoyed what you've just heard this evening, then make sure you leave a like on this video and annihilate that subscribe button. Such a small act of obedience is exactly what we need to put the food on the table around here. There's only so many days we can have refried kidney and toe jam hash before I'm absolutely sick of it. Spoiler alert, that ship sailed long ago. Now, I must bid you adieu. I've many things to take care of, and this outro is eating into my day off. Run along now. Have no fear, we'll be here every Tuesday and Thursday to bring you another terrible tale. Go forth, my ghastly gang, and stay spooky.